I'm going to open it up with just a general kind of question. I'd like to start over here with PZ and just kind of go down the line and just kind of general thoughts about the video you guys just saw. What do you think?
The parts with me were the best. No, it was an interesting video because it brought out multiple sides of the argument. It was a bit flawed in that it did not acknowledge which side was right, which I think is important. The key thing for me in this whole debate about how we should treat religion is who's right? What's the truth? And this constant request that we maintain deference and respect and acknowledge the value to religion of these people and bow down and say, okay, we're not going to criticize you, is about demanding respect for lies, and I refuse to do that.
I think my favourite part was the bit where they had those people with the funny accents from that other country. I disagreed with a fair amount of what was said, actually, although I understand why people have these differing views, and I have to agree with PZ. We get to this point, we say, well, we need this, we need that, and I'm hearing phrases like militant and Marines, but no one's actually having this discussion to say, no, this is not the way I think we should be doing it. I don't think we should be using words like militant. I think that's used to describe us. I think we can be assertive without being militant, and even people who describe themselves as militant, I've never seen someone be that militant. We're not holding guns and threatening to take over Congress if they continue to say the Lord's Prayer. That's what Marines do, that's what militants do. There's no military coup being planned, to my knowledge. I mean, for a minute, I'm out of the loop. I just got here. Oh, foreigner. Thanks. No, I'm totally in on that. I mean, I can't fire a gun to save my soul. Oh wait, I made a joke, I didn't even realise it. Other than the whole militant thing, I think a lot of that was pretty good common sense, and I've actually had a lot of success with catching flies with honey rather than the vitriol that we get sometimes. I think we should avoid that. I think we should not ever show respect to silly concepts. I think it's reasonable to ridicule the ridiculous, but not people. People are mistaken, they're misinformed. For the most part, they're not stupid, they're just misinformed.
There were definitely things in the video that I agree with, even stuff that PZ said. I'm not going to go so far as to say one side is right or wrong. I think as far as the conversation with tone and approach, I'm a big fan of considering the audience and considering what point you're trying to make. I think there can be a time and a place for being fairly assertive and in your face and making those points that jar people out of their comfort zone. But I also think there's a time to be respectful of the people without necessarily having to feel like you're accommodating their belief. The one thing I think that sets people off when people are considering, their place in the secular movement can be that if they don't toe the line and agree almost in the same way, on the other side where, we make fun of the religious people for being so fundamentalist, that they don't have a place here. And I think that sets people off as they're considering leaving religion, as they're considering finding our community. If they don't feel welcome to even consider the thought process, then we've already lost.
Just a brief comment. I agreed with most of what people said in the video. I think a lot of good points were made on all sides, and what that tells me is that it's a really complicated question to which there is no one right answer. There's certainly no answer that's going to satisfy everyone or even most people. it kind of throws a little bit of doubt on the question of whether the conversation is even worth having at all, since it's like trying to settle gun ownership, things like that. You're simply never going to find an answer that satisfies everyone.
It's kind of silly to have the Firebrand diplomat type of debate because I don't think anyone has to choose a side. You do whatever makes you comfortable, and the more voices that are out there, the better it's going to be for all of us. There was an article that just came out the other day on Salon or Alternate that said, these are the 5 most awful atheists. For example, Bill Maher, because he also believes in some other really crazy stuff, and Penn Jillette because of his political views, whatever. And, you know, I'm just reading that, I'm thinking, but they're outspoken atheists, and that's an awesome thing, and they manage to reach people that some of us will never be able to reach. And the same thing goes for, like, the people who we might call firebrands, and people who are total interfaith is their thing. They manage to reach people that other people in the atheist spectrum will not be able to reach, and they're getting people to think about faith and question faith and why it may be a bad thing. All of it's good, embrace it all. I'm really less concerned with someone who may be alienating some segment, because I know even if they're alienating some people, they get people thinking, and that's an awesome thing.
I want to make a point on there's a little bit of a sidetrack. The gun thing, it is relevant because religion and guns seems to go quite well in this country for reasons that I don't understand. The recent report had guns in America at 90 guns per 100 people. It's 270 million weapons owned by civilians in the United States. That's 45 million more weapons owned by civilians in this country than all law enforcement and military in the world combined. So, although there might not be one right answer, there are certainly lots of wrong answers that we can leave out of the conversation. And I think that's a conversation worth having as well. And what we're left with is multiple right answers. But we get rid of the wrong answers too. I think that's fair, you know.
I was shouting questions.
I'll shout from way back here. If that's okay. I know you're still hanging up papers. So a two-part question, because I know you're all intelligent enough to handle 2 questions. So just this last week, James Croft, love him from Harvard Humanist, great guy, but definitely was stagnant on the accommodationalist side. Posted in one of our private strategic freethought organizers groups on Facebook that he was very upset that Ernest Pierce from Pennsylvania was getting ready to threaten to burn a Quran on the Capitol steps if they didn't end the year of the Bible. Jessica Alquist's father pitched in and said he thought this was hurting the movement as well, and just really, really laying into Ernest for what he was doing. I invited Ernest to join the conversation. He explained the reasoning behind it and thought he cleared it up pretty well, and they continued with some of Stedman's lines that they just saw no evidence that things like this were helping the movement in any way. And I just wonder if the fact that in the last 5 years the atheist movement has grown as large as it has, with more out atheists than ever before, with the best funding they've ever had, what evidence do they have to say that there's no evidence that it's helping the movement? Is the growth of atheism completely in spite of Firebrands, or is it because of them? Would be question one. Because often watching this, I was thinking about the line recovering from religion uses a lot of, heal the sick and shoot the zombies. And yet we often worry about offending the zombies when we shouldn't. Again, offense shouldn't be something that we worry about. People will get offended. My second point on this, for you guys to comment on, would be saying the secularism, it's fine if they keep it in their own homes, and many of us are fine saying, just let them have their things in their own homes. And a lot of us go one step further saying, we can't allow that. And I guess an analogy that makes sense for me is if Google, who's the largest computer owner on Earth, decided that 80% of its computers in one day, they would just switch over to play solitaire. The world would go, what a waste of the most amazing resource we have on the planet. Yet we all walk around with the most complicated computers in our heads. We are the greatest resource to the human species, is human thought. Yet 80% of them walk around playing solitaire in their head. Do you not see that as it is beneficial to end religion just so that the wasted thought that those human brains are using to answer the world's problem with religious answers could be used to come up with secular, realistic, real-world solutions?
I've already forgotten question one.
The microphone, who was supposed to repeat
That's
the
fine.
question, and I'm not even going to try.
That's right. The first question then summarized would be, accommodations claim that there's no evidence that Firebrands are helping the movement. In fact, they claim they're hurting, yet we're larger and better funded than we've ever been, and Firebrands are more outspoken than they've ever been. So I guess where do you see them coming up saying that it's hurting the movement when I think it's clearly helping?
As someone who spoke out against what Ernest was doing, and for the background for that is, tell me if I'm wrong, I think Pennsylvania passed some sort of non-controversial resolution calling for a year of religious diversity. And one of the things it said is, because we all respect religious books, we're going to pass this resolution. And Ernest is saying, well, no, I don't respect everything religious book says. And to prove that point, I'm going to, tear pages out of the Quran, or burn the Quran on the
The latest is that he's flogging the Quran.
Flogging the Quran with a whip.
With bacon.
Bacon, with bacon. Here's the thing. He's doing that. I mean, my questions are not the offense things. It's a question of strategy and effectiveness. Who's your audience for that thing? Is it the politicians? Because they see you as a crazy person. Is it the general public at large? Because they won't understand your nuanced points that there are certain passages that are offensive. I don't think that's an effective way of getting that point across. Now, in a similar way, there are other groups that have said, we're just going to hold up posters with those Bible verses or Quran verses to let people know, look, we have a problem with this and you should too. I like that. I think that is effective, and I think that gets the point across. And if people get offended by that, I don't really care. My issue with what Ernest was doing is I think it's just going to piss off people for the wrong reasons, because I know what he's trying to do. He's just not doing it well. That's my issue with that. Your second question was regarding...
leaving religion alone as long as it leaves us alone?
Yeah, you said it's a waste of brain power or something that so many people think. But it's not all a waste. Some of it, a lot of times, religious people do a lot of good things, maybe for the wrong reasons. And so I don't think it's all bad. But I'm certainly not out to ban it. I think we'd be more effective, not if we ban religion, I don't know if that's what you were suggesting, but we have to convince them that we're right. That's why we got to take on these issues, and that's why we go after it, because we want them to see these things as we do. You're not going to do that by bashing them over the head. You got to get them to level with you, and different people are going to respond to that in different ways. So that's why I like this is a change for me personally. I'm much more, I like the other side. I like the Firebrand side. I don't think I'm good at doing that, but I can see how it can be effective. And it can reach people that I could never reach. At the same time, believe me, I get plenty of emails from people who don't like that too, whatever. Then I'll talk to them. So, I mean, we got to reach out to all those people. I agree. I don't want to just let them be religious privately because they're wrong. PZ's right. It's all about the truth. They're still believing the wrong things, even if it doesn't affect anyone and they're not trying to influence policy. They're still wrong. That's not my priority because I think the policy issues are more of a pressing concern. But it doesn't mean I'm just going to totally ignore that. I think that's still a debate worth having.
To touch more on Ernest real quick, and I think we probably all have some comments on that one. First of all, I've talked to Ernest about this. He's a friend of mine, and I think it's very possible to see other people in the movement and the choices they're making and the actions they're taking and the statements they're making and not agree with them and still see that they have a right to do that. I do think, I disagree with what he's doing. I'm not comfortable with it. But he's creating dialogue. People are talking about it.
Talking about what an assy is.
and if you've seen other things he's done, that's fairly par for the course of his conversation.
But that's where I have an issue with him. I want them discussing the passages in these books that do not deserve respect and that no decent person would ever respect. And I think that's the point he wants to get across, that's not what people are talking about. That's why I have an issue with what he's doing.
And I can see that, but I'm just saying, I don't think he's, in this one particular thing, doing an incredible amount of damage. I think he's doing what works for him. This is his personality, this is how he approaches things. Just like your personality, this is how you do it, this is how I do it. that sort of thing. So that's my take on that and all that. But we're gonna just stick with that one for a second. So we'll come back to this when there's lots of
Yeah, Ernst's action is a little bit troublesome, but it bothers me for a different reason, and that is that kind of attack on the Koran tends to inflame the jingoistic, racist assholes in this country who then want to persecute Muslims, which I am totally dead set against. That's not what we want to do. And it's also kind of peculiar that he's desecrating a Koran instead of a Bible when the whole issue is that they decreed the year of the Bible.
But he's actually not protesting the year of the Bible. He's actually protesting the religious diversity because it said, part of the thing said, whereas we respect religious texts, whatever.
Yes, but if I were doing it, I'd be fair. I'd have my Koran, and I'd have my Bible, and I'd have the God delusion, and I'd be pissing on all three. That's the way to do this. But at the same time, I also agree that, yeah, he's got a perfect right to do this. That's one of the things we have to do is we need people who are willing to go out there and get labeled asshole, as you people are doing here, and demonstrate that there are people who have absolutely no respect for these religious ideas. That's a powerful thing. That what he's actually doing is he's sort of sacrificing some of his personal credibility in the name of showing that, yeah, here's a human being who does not think that this stupid, despicable, contemptible holy book deserves one iota of deference at all. And I kind of like that part. It's just, right now it's really dangerous to do that focusing just on Muslims because there's people in this country who are on edge there and are willing to do things that we would not support at all.
I wouldn't piss on the Quran. I feel like my urine could be put to better use. I've been tempted over the past. I don't really have much of a YouTube channel yet. I've only just started with the whole social networking thing. But one of the things I'm intending to do on YouTube is, and although this hasn't actually addressed the question on whether Firebrands are helping or hurting the brand, or whether they're not related. But I'd like to get together a pile of books, including the Quran, the Bible, perhaps Dawkins' book. PZ, you're coming out with a book shortly. And burn them, right, in effigy. And even a first edition hardcover copy of my own book. And not out of anger, but in the same way that Draw Muhammad Day has done certain things. Simply say, guys, watch them burn. It's pigment on pulped wood. That's all a book is. You cannot destroy an idea anymore. You cannot destroy a book. Books exist forever now. Books that have been out of print for sometimes hundreds of years are now available to purchase in hardcover and paperback on Amazon through print-on-demand systems. You cannot destroy the Quran. You cannot destroy a Bible. It's simply a symbolic thing. You're burning a book in protest in the same way that burning a flag in protest is not going to destroy America. Presumably we're talking about the American flag. I think that's a reasonable thing to do, and people might get upset with it, but I think the more Muhammads that are drawn, the fewer people get annoyed about it, because there are now so many thousands of pictures of Muhammad. It's worth noting that Draw Muhammad Day only started 2 years ago, and the first time Pakistan blocked how many? A couple of dozen websites for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, the whole lot. And last May 20, the third Draw Muhammad Day, Twitter only was blocked for about 8 hours, and then the head of the country said, you know what, just unblock it, don't worry about it. So it worked, it actually worked. And Draw Muhammad Day had a lot of pictures that were pretty vulgar, but most of them were very innocuous, just saying, you know what, here's a picture of Muhammad, you shouldn't be upset about this. It wasn't done out of spite, it was done to show it's just a picture. Don't be upset. And I think we can, I don't want to start necessarily a burn a holy book day, but I would not object to it and I would participate in it probably, and in fact I will have something like that. You're burning a lot of different books. Respectable books, non-respectable books, it's pigment on wood.
But this goes back to the conversation that Adam was asking about, about Ernest, about the strategy here. I don't think it would be effective to draw Muhammad with like a bomb on his forehead. I don't think that gets the point across that we're trying to make, which is one about like free speech and we have a right to not take your beliefs seriously. The ones I really liked for Draw Muhammad Day had that strategic bit in them. So they would draw like a stick figure, and underneath it would just say like, it was like a Wheel of Fortune, like MU dash 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 dash. Is that offensive? Underneath. Because where do you draw the line? What if you just draw 2 dots and a mouth and you say Muhammad underneath? Is that something that should be banned as well? Like they're getting that discussion going. I like that discussion.
And it's worked, it's been highly effective.
Yeah.
Which is great.
But when you, and I know this because people have drawn these images, if you're drawing the image of, something as blasphemous, and I use that very broadly, as possible, what point are you trying to make other than, I'm going to do this because I can, and I just want to piss people off? I don't know if that's going to get a point across to the people you want to get it across to, as opposed to the ones that get them thinking.
Yeah, that was I think the original question was, the firebrand, whether that's helping, and whether the correlation of the rise of this phrase firebrands has popped up a couple of times. Correlation between the rise of them and the rise of the funding and the activism in atheism and secular humanism is whether the correlation is a causation. And I couldn't tell you. I think there's a role for it, but doing things out of anger and spite, I don't think is going to win any hearts and minds. It might fire up a couple of other atheistic groups, but I don't think anyone's going to say, "Wow, you burnt my holy book in effigy." I totally understand what you're saying. I won. You won me over.
I just wanted to add a thought that I don't personally see much difference between the really outspoken and potentially offensive comedians like George Carlin, things like that, who rail into religion. I see what they do is very similar to what Ernest is doing. They're making a public statement. The entire point is shock value. The point is to get people thinking about it, talking about it. I mean, I don't think anyone has ever listened to those types of comedians and then, turned around and gone, good point, I'm over it. I don't think that's the point of it. So
maybe we see that differently. When I listen to those comedians, I feel like they are getting people to think and that they're very effective in the way they do that. And when I see what Ernest is doing, I don't see him raising those questions in people's minds as effectively as the comedians do.
One of the underlying assumptions behind this whole discussion is that being an out atheist is probably the best thing that you can do to help the movement. We're building on that discussion, talking about how to be an out atheist. And one of the things that David Silverman said specifically is that he wants to draw those closeted atheists out. One of the things, the main concerns of people like David Smalley is that people who are kind of on the edge, deciding whether or not they want to call themselves an atheist, deciding whether or not they want to come out, will see somebody like Ernst, see somebody like David Silverman and go, no, fuck that, I'm staying in the closet. Does that affect that conversation, or is it true, like Hemant is saying, Ernst and David Silverman and that kind of firebrand activity really isn't going to be the determining factor of whether or not that person comes out of the closet, because they can find somebody like Friendly Atheist, like some of the softer sites, like the David Smalleys, or like whoever. And they will be able to find those people, and those people will draw them out. So we don't have to worry about whether or not those people are coming out of the closet.
Well, yeah, we do. I mean, but the thing is that, if you've got somebody who sees Dave Silverman, who, yeah, sure, he's aggressive and assertive, but he's not threatening anybody. If we have somebody who sees somebody like Dave Silverman, who just gets up and gives a nice speech, in which he says we should be more aggressive in promoting our beliefs, and then they run away and hide in the closet, then I say, fuck those candy-ass cowards, we don't need them. This is not setting a radical standard for coming out. This is mild stuff. This is a guy who just says, okay, I'm an atheist, I'm proud of being an atheist, I think Christians are all wrong, I think Muslims are all wrong. They're not saying go shoot them, right? They're not saying arm yourselves and protect yourselves. They're not saying anything radical at all. So I would say that anybody who chickens out at this point they're not recoverable. They're cowards. We don't need them. Goodbye.
Okay, I'm going to have to respond actually not so much to your question, but to PZ's statement. Let's say someone's looking for a nice religion, and they haven't decided, they're looking for one that sort of suits them, which is how religion works rather than truth. So this one suits my personality. I'm considering Christianity. And they're flipping channels trying to find a nice evangelical who can, speak to them and touch them and reach out. And they flip onto Pat Robertson. As you know, he's a very moderate and plain smoker, very meek, like PC. And PC's the Pat Robertson of the atheism movement. All right. Come back at dawn for the arena spectacular. Me getting fed to lions. Okay, so they flip onto Pat Robertson, and Pat Robertson starts talking about under no circumstances should you date an atheist or a Muslim or be a lesbian or be friends with lesbians and gay people, and you have to pray all the time, and hate was caused because the Haitians made a pact with the devil and sacrificed a pig. He said this online on live television. And so on and so forth. That would probably put a bitter taste in the mouth of a person who's considering Christianity. It's like, if that's what Christianity is, I'm not interested. And I don't think it's necessarily a question of cowardice. I think it's a question of if the only atheist you see, or the most common atheist you see, is people saying, you know what, I'm right, you're wrong, and if you don't agree, then you're an idiot. I think that's not going to help. I don't think it's a question of cowardice. I think it's a question of them saying, well, I don't want to really associate with the wrong. I'm not saying David Silverman's this person, but if these firebrands are burning Qurans, that, I can understand why that could put a bit of taste in someone's mouth who's on this fence and thinking, should I be an atheist? And when you see that, it's like, I don't want to call myself an atheist, not for that. I won't associate, not out of cowardice, but out of disgust. I don't want to associate myself with someone who is so spiteful. I don't think that's an unreasonable argument.
By the way, if anyone's on the fence and considering that, we've won. They've doubted, they're questioning, great. It's not like they're going to run back to evangelical Christianity.
So I gotta jump in because I've been sitting here quiet the whole time. I think this is a good point to answer. I actually don't self-identify as an atheist. And a large part of that is just because the word means different things to different people, and kind of everyone's definition of any given label is probably wrong. I don't have any religious convictions, certainly. If you ask me a question, I'm happy to tell you what I think. But my show is not an atheist show. I'm very proud of the fact that I get plenty of emails and even financial support from Christians. And many of those emails that come back to me say, yours is the only science podcast that doesn't make fun of me. And I'm proud of that, and I think that's a great thing. And it means that I've engaged a larger audience than many of you have. And that's important. So there is certainly headway to be made from a perspective other than how do we deal with the fact that Christians are wrong. So this, much of what we've been talking about is completely kind of outside of my genre. I hate the idea of forms of entertainment, podcasts being my form of entertainment. I hate the idea of those being inherently negative and being about debunking or telling people that they're wrong about things. I want to always give people something to think about. I want people to say, hey, cool, I learned something really new and interesting today. And I don't want to have any litmus test for who's allowed to listen to my show and who's allowed to benefit from it. I think it's a great gateway into anyone's mind, whoever they are, is to simply engage them with fascinating, new, cool information.
Okay, I have to make a couple points. I'm sorry. First of all, I would not be proud to have a forum in which I refuse to address the most significant problems in the country today, where what we do is we refuse to ridicule the ridiculous and refuse to address this segment of society, which is definitely the majority right now, because we don't want to lose readership or listenership. I think that's another form of cowardice when you do that. I'm much more respectful of people who get out there and charge and do things about this huge problem instead of pretending it doesn't exist. And I have to address a couple of things you said. You know, being called Pat Robertson, no, not so good. But let me say two things about that. One is, this is kind of counterfactual, but if you look at the country right now, and you look at the state of this country, you find there's Pat Robertson, there's Rush Limbaugh, there's all these radical Republicans. They're not scaring anybody away. Look at how successful they've been. That taking a strong position and expressing some certainty in your views seems to be a successful strategy for making it. And then, of course, the other thing is, of course, I'm not Pat Robertson. That when you look at my views or David Silverman's views or any of these loud atheist views, what you find are people who tend to be socially progressive, who are inclusive of people while being demanding of the ideas that are expressed in those terms. So I'm willing to work with Christians, but I'm not willing to silence myself in order to do so. And similarly, you know, like with the issue with Ernst, you know, my concern there is there are Muslim people who must be protected, who must have the right to exist, and who must not feel personally threatened by this issue, but there are Muslim ideas that need to be kicked around and ridiculed. So that's the balance, is we've got to focus on getting those ideas ridiculed while protecting the ability of people to practice those ideas no matter how silly they are.
Going back to what Brian was saying a second ago, I mean, this is like the Neil deGrasse Tyson approach, which is that he doesn't want to be the spokesperson for atheism. He doesn't want to be identified primarily as an atheist, which I'm fine with. My issue with that is that he was kind of running away from the term, and you saw that in that video. And same thing with Brian, like, if you don't believe in God, you're an atheist. You don't have to embrace the term, but you are. And if you want to be seen as like the science spokesperson, hey, more power to you, I love that. And with the people on the fence, again, I don't care if they call themselves an atheist, I don't care if they get involved in the atheist movement, but I want them to not be, I don't want them to not rely on religious faith. And if they're questioning it, we're doing our job. That's what we want to see. So the fact that someone may be scared off by Ernest, okay, maybe they're not part of the atheist movement, but I want them to still question, and if they still think, well, you know, he's right that the Quran has some bullshit in it, but okay, but maybe he's being pushed away from ever joining American Atheists. All right, fine, I don't really care.
American Unionists, they're still there.
I have to address your charge that I'm cowardly. You have your blog, I have my show. They're different genres. They're about different subject matter. There's no expectation that mine should be anything like yours. And your charge that I'm a coward for not doing the same thing you do is just plain goofy. In all respect, and as someone with beer in his room, I hope that's something.
What I object to is the idea that you should take pride in not antagonizing idiots.
I don't think that's what it's
That's not my show. That's your show.
Fine.
That's
Yeah,
not my show.
I agree that I think there are places for things like podcasts and blogs and whatever that focus on narrow interests. That you can say, okay, I'm just gonna focus on the Bigfoot issue or the Chupacabra issue or whatever important thing presses your buttons. And that's reasonable, that's entirely respectable. One of the problems I have with the skeptic movement right now is that it does endorse a kind of cowardice where they have been saying they do not want to address religious issues, that they have a narrow skepticism that they will not apply to others. And I would agree with you 100%. If you wanted to just say, okay, my blog is that this focus, that's what I'm going to do, great. It's just taking pride in the fact that you're avoiding confronting a serious problem is not a good thing.
It's generated into an argument, there's only one right way to be an effective public atheist. I disagree with that. I think that's a stupid thing to argue over. Come on, panelists make the point. How to use this kind of discussion isn't that useful. Right? We've got to do it our own way. There are different ways of being effective, and we should be glad to have for them.
Give him a microphone.
I wanted to address, you made a comment to the effect, sorry, to the effect of, if we have people that are offended by Dave or Ernest or whatever, and then we don't need them, or something that, I'm paraphrasing, scared. But I think though, I mean, if we're looking at, you know, the goal obviously is, at some point, we want the secular movement to grow, we want the atheist movement to grow. So where are those people going to come from? I mean, in the United States, they're coming from religious populations, they're coming from those being those church pew atheists. So, you know, they're in a culture and they're in a viewpoint where they see people like Dave and Ernest and you and more outspoken people, that is very threatening and offensive to them at this time. That doesn't mean a year from now, 2 years from now, they're going to feel that way, and I'm one of those people. So I think there is a lot of room for what Brian's doing, encouraging critical thought, things like that, and saying, you know, I'm not comfortable stepping on all of these toes because there needs to be a place for them to listen and learn and explore all of that as they're on their way towards where they can fit and if they want to take a place in an active step and move.
Of course, the Recovering from Religion Foundation and the Clergy Project, of course, is the very notion of helping the scared people get to the point where they're no longer scared. So I don't think we should necessarily write them off immediately.
This is, no, I tend to write them off immediately, but that does not mean that they're irredeemable and that they'll never be part of the movement. That what we'll do, but these are people who are going to take a lot more time, a lot more coddling. Maybe your movement, that's what you do. You'll stroke them and reassure them and bring them into life. But yeah, but you know that if we're talking about this conflict between the Firebrands and the accommodationists, Firebrands are the shock troops, the Panzer battalions that are charging out there right now. And yeah, okay, militant metaphor, yeah. But they're the ones who do not have any need for somebody who's going to run in the closet when they see George Carlin reading. But of course, then what we also need is the people who are going to come along and bandage the wounded feelings and patch things up afterwards, and that's you guys.
Interfaith dialogues. They are the most damn frustrating thing on the face of the earth, because it starts with the premise that all ideas are equal and have to be equally respected, and therefore no one can touch. You all have to put on your gloves and play nice, and you can't touch one another and criticize and challenge. Second point, don't we have to take a step back here in a good PR marketing approach and say, what's the aim of this? I haven't heard your aim. Yeah, Firebrand versus Niceties versus this versus that. What are we going for here? Are we going for abolishing religion, all of the above? What is our aim here? You seem to have an aim, you seem to have an aim, you seem to, so where the hell are we?
All I can say is that I agree.
As someone who has been involved in the interfaith discussions or whatever, I mean, I don't see, and I think I can speak for like someone like Chris Stedman too, who many of you have read. We don't see the interfaith stuff as having to silence ourselves, to criticize faith. We don't. We're more than happy to say you're all wrong about all the religion stuff. But when it comes to certain aspects of it, fine. And believe me, I get frustrated with our movement when people criticize the whole idea of interfaith stuff. Let me give you one example. I'm the chair of Foundation Beyond Belief. We're trying to get atheists to give money to charity that are not necessarily atheist charities. When we started the organization, one of the ideas that we were throwing around is, well, what if there's an organization that is run by religious people, but they don't do anything religious? They don't proselytize, they don't use the money for Bible or whatever. They want to feed the hungry, and that is where all of their money goes toward. We said, that's awesome. We should give people that option if they want to donate to an organization like that. And we approached several of the atheist organizations in our movement and said, is this something you can get on board with? Where we might pick, like, I don't know, Habitat for Humanity and this animal rights group and this women's rights group, and then like the Hindu Save the Planet Foundation. And they said, absolutely not. We do not want to be part of an organization that would even give money to groups that are run by religious people like that. And ultimately, we had to go at it by ourselves because we said we'd rather do it that way by ourselves than to not even consider those organizations. That to me is interfaith type of work, because I don't care what you believe in that sense, because you're working toward a goal I really like. And when I see the interfaith movement and when they're doing stuff, and when I see atheists get involved in that, the ones who are prominent in that world, they don't see themselves as having to silence what they believe in regards to faith. I remember I was invited by the Chicago Tribune, where they invited a bunch of religious representatives to discuss kind of how their religion section works, and they just want to have a conversation. Hey, get to know each other, because you represent a lot of different faith groups in your areas, right? And you know, it was funny to watch because they were very tiptoeing around me, because when they even the religion reporter there made a point, every time she said interfaith, she almost had to correct herself. Oh, we do this interfaith and no faith. And that sort of thing, because they knew that the problem is the word. Interfaith seems to lend credence to the word faith, and we shouldn't. And that's, maybe inner thought would be a better word, I don't know. But no one that I've seen in the interfaith movement is silencing themselves as atheists because they are working with religious people, but their priority is what is the goal that we are working toward. Maybe it's helping human rights in this area, or helping, whatever goal you want to get to, and we can work with religious people when it comes to that stuff, and sometimes I think it's worth putting aside the religious differences because we do have a lot of goals. I have way more in common with liberal Christians than they do with like crazy right-wing conservative ones, and I'm happy to work with them on certain issues. And so I do, and we all...
Okay, I have to say, interfaith is one of those things that pushes my buttons, but I will try to restrain myself. I totally despise interfaith. Sorry, Hemant. I think it's just the fact that it puts the label faith on anything when faith is the enemy. Faith is what we have to treat as a vice that needs to be eradicated from the human race. Okay. But I think your other question was much more interesting and much more powerful, and that is, what are our goals? And I think that's what we have to be clear about. No matter what our tactics are, do we share common goals? And I think we do. That my personal goal is I want to see, okay, you just said I want to see eradication of religion. Not quite. What I want to see is religion put in its proper place as a personal and private issue. You could like fairy tales, that's fine. And like religion, that's fine. But the problem comes when people take fairy tales and use those as guidance for policy. That right now in this country we face this terrible problem, a number of terrible problems, things like global warming, emerging diseases, destruction of the oceans and fisheries, all these sorts of things are going on. And we have morons in Washington, D.C. who are saying because the Bible has God promising not to destroy the world ever again, we don't have to worry about them. That's what I want eliminated. If there's anything I need to eradicate, it's that attitude that your personal myths can be used as a replacement for evidence-based policy.
As an oftentimes panel moderator, I'm going to refer to there's an awful lot of hands in the air, and I presume we're running short on time.
Yeah, I was going to say we've got 3 more questions, so 1, 2,
Okay.
and 3.
So if we could rapid fire 3
And
questions.
we'll try and make them quick. We'll try and make the answers quick. So, well, that's what Sherry just said.
Okay, one question.
One question.
Quick answer, and then I'd like to just go down the line again and just get some closing remarks from each of you. Go ahead.
Sorry, my question
Be loud.
how can we politicize a lot of the atheists that prefer to keep a purely educational movement? A lot of atheists are maybe disappointed with conservative Republicans, but not willing to be politicized in the movement against the ideas of a little religion mixed in short prayer. How can we make these apathetic atheists as active as we are? How can we convince them to join us?
I've always found it effective when you just hammer home these issues that mean a lot to people who might not be able to get off their butt on a lot of other issues. But when it comes to seeing their gay friends get hurt, they will do stuff about it. When it comes to seeing, a young atheist getting criticized in their hometown, they will get off their butt and do something about it. We just have to keep telling those stories and making people aware of that.
I agree. I really think it's about, talking to them and finding out what they care about. Everybody cares about different things. Everybody's passionate about different things. Maybe they just haven't realized how much things apply to them. And it's okay if some people just don't care. I think we can't necessarily mobilize the environment as much as we'd like to.
Maybe just tell them that about the congressman in Virginia last year who introduced a bill making a felony out of miscarriages with penalties up to and including the death sentence. See if that rocks their boat.
We made it quick.
All right, closing remarks. PZ, start again and then go down line.
Why me first? Well, okay, closing
Here's
remarks.
about atheism.
All right, okay. Let's see. Then we've been rattling around a lot of different things here. Let me clarify a few things. One is that this last question was also kind of interesting, in that yes, we have to recognize that there's a wide range of views within atheism. Unfortunately, they're not all clones of me. That's something we can aspire to, but no, it's not the case. And there are going to be people who will say, okay, this is a less important issue to me, this is a more important issue to me, here's a focus I want to take, here's a tactic I want to take. And I think that's fine, that's great. But there are lines that have to be drawn, and if you've got somebody like this person you're talking about who just wants to be an educator, then they're not an active part of the movement. That's fine. There's no penalty for that. And we do not give out merit badges, and God knows we don't have high salaries for this stuff, so it's okay. But it's just that we have to appreciate the fact that there will be a wide range of approaches that, I'm not going to tell Sarah to stop doing what she's doing. I think what she's doing is great. Keep that up. What Jerry's doing is great. Keep that up. Even what Brian is doing. Okay, that's great. Yeah. But one of the problems is that I always face, and one of the reasons I get kind of angry, is that whenever we have these discussions, it's not focused on, oh, well, are those wimpy atheists destroying the movement? It's always, are the firebrands being destructive to the movement? There's an asymmetry there, and I have to lash out and fight back and say that we need all these different perspectives. And if you're sitting there trying to tell me that I'm destroying the movement because I refuse to compromise on issues of truth, well, fuck you.
I'm reminded from PZ's elegant words of when Neil deGrasse Tyson, there's a video on YouTube where Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of rebukes Richard Dawkins for having if you don't get it, then bugger off. And Dawkins accepts the rebuke and says, but I'm not as bad as some, and he recounts a story about, I think the head of the NCSE or the British equivalent, and the reporter said, well, what would you say to someone who's not sure about science? And he said, I would say, science is interesting, and if you don't like it, you can fuck off. My closing statement, really all I would like to say is to try and remove this Panzer tank reference and the machine guns and the napalm and the Uzis. All of these references is a bad idea. You saw what happened with Gabriel Giffords, and it was linked very quickly to Sarah Palin's slogan, don't retreat, reload. Yeah? So this is why I say please try to minimize the military references. I don't think it helps. And there's already, even if we say nothing from now on, we're still thought of as the least favourable group in the country or in many parts of the world. There's a guy, Alexander Arn, for those of you who don't know, who has been imprisoned in Indonesia for 2.5 years for being an atheist. He was beaten up by a mob, arrested, beaten in prison, and then sentenced to prison, and a fine equivalent to 2 years the annual wage of an Indonesian person. So even if we don't say anything, we're still not very well thought of. I don't think it helps if we call ourselves militant. We get called that enough, and even mild-mannered people like Francesca Stavrokopoulou was called a radical skeptic. We don't need to use these words. We're being accused of doing it already. Be assertive. Don't take non-truth for truth. Don't be respectful to nonsense. But I think we need to remove military terms at the very least.
I think in closing, the most important thing for me that I'd like everybody to take away is, I mean, we all have very different personalities, but we all have found things that are really important to us that in our own way is making a difference in the movement. And I really want to encourage everybody to do the same thing. You know, we all have our own talents and we all have our own skills, and everyone here can contribute to that in your own way. And if that's not getting up and talking to people in public or making statements on TV or, you know, the Quran with the bacon or whatever, that's okay. We all have ways of doing that. You can talk to family, you can talk to your coworkers, you can, you know, in conversation when people ask you what church you go to, you can say what, you know, what you think about that, and in a way that creates dialogue and opportunity. I think that's the most important thing. We're all doing things because it works for us. It's our personality. It's just how we fit, and I want everyone else to take that same message.
My experience has been that if you want to engage someone's mind with new ideas, start by engaging their heart. Find some middle ground, find something that you can both agree on, that you can both be excited about, something that you can share. I don't believe that your average Christian next door neighbor is an idiot or stupid or is the problem that needs to be eradicated. But I do believe that quite often you'll find that he's intelligent and fun and shares a lot more in common with you than I think you probably may suspect. When you find a middle ground and you start enjoying and learning about things together that get you both excited, you'll find that both of you are more receptive to listen to the other's new ideas, no matter how radical they sound. And I think that you can convince just about anyone of anything when you take that perspective.
I think the biggest thing maybe, I don't think everyone always realizes how much power they have to really influence the people in their circles. Anything you can do or say that will get them to think critically, and by the way, again, I don't care if they're promoting an atheist cause, but if you're getting someone close to you to become an organ donor, or donate blood, or give money to a secular charity, or donate a Chick-fil-A, whatever, that stuff makes a difference. And I would say also, if you gave me the choice between like 1,000 people linking to something I wrote or tweeted versus 1,000 people saying the same thing I did in their own words, that is so much better. Like, don't retweet something that you hear on this panel. Put it into your own words and then spread it out because it will mean more. And if everyone did that, and it doesn't have to be an offensive comment, it could be, but it doesn't have to be. If you did those things and the people who you were friends with, or your family members and your colleagues, when they hear that stuff, it means a lot more, and it is that much more effective, and you should start those conversations whenever possible. Don't be silent about that stuff.